Okay, welcome everybody. Today is January 18th, and we're having a special council meeting to have an educational session on our budget. So I'd like to call the meeting to order, and I see that all council members are present except for Councillor Hammond will be joining us in a little bit. He has a funeral that he's attending. Any declarations of conflicts of interest? Okay, seeing none, thank you. If you are here, reminder to put your cell phone on silent mode, please. Adoption of the published agenda. I need a mover to adopt the special council meeting agenda. Councillor McGuire-Blaise, seconded by Deputy Mayor Shepley. Any questions on the agenda? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried unanimously. So just a reminder again today that it's an educational session. The true discussions will take place February 13th. Make sure that you're writing down all your high-level questions and things you want to deliberate on the 13th. And we will move to our Director of Corporate Services and Treasurer, Ms. Jarusevich. So thank you, Kate.
Hey, so welcome everyone. The long-awaited 2023 budget walkthrough. I'm just going to let Abby pull up our slide deck. Just bear with us 1 second. Okay, so before we get into the fun stuff being the numbers, I just want to give a shout out to the budget team. So the ladies to the right of me played a very integral part in this. They worked very closely with Mark Tortola, our manager of communications. So to my right, I have Anne-Marie Eunice, our manager of finance and business services. She started with the town in May. She's hit the ground running and has been a great asset to the team. And so her main focus was the capital budget. And to the far right, I have Maddie Tellett, and she's actually been in the town for 5 years now. She started as a summer student and is now in the financial analyst role. And so Maddie and Mark actually created a very big efficiency this year in that they linked our budget software to the budget document. So a lot of great things happened this year, and the budget also has a new look. So you'll notice that each of the slides we're about to go through reference the page numbers. So if you want to follow along in your budget document, the page numbers are in the title of most slides. So just a quick overview of the agenda. We will try our best to stick to this. We may go over, we'll hopefully not. We'll be out of here by 4:30 at the latest though. So we're hoping to have lunch anywhere from 12 to 1. I'll take you through operating this morning. This afternoon, we'll get into the capital presentations that'll be done by all of the different divisions and their managers. So I am going to ask that you hold questions until I open the floor for questions. Sometimes what we found in the past is that by the time we get through a section, I might have already answered your question. So I will hold sporadic question periods throughout the presentation. So what is the point of today? So the point of the walkthrough today is an in-depth informative session on what is in front of you and how administration came to these numbers and figures that we're presenting. Again, questions we will hold at the end of each section. We will not be deliberating today. As Mayor Bondi spoke, deliberations will occur on the February 13th and 14th. That is when the floor is yours. So from today on, you have time to discuss with your residents, you have time to meet with directors, you have time to meet with myself and ask any questions that you might have after today. And feel free to ask questions throughout the day as well. So right now I'm going to pass it over to our CAO, Doug Sweet, to give a quick welcome message.
Jarusevich, and want to welcome council taking this a new format for us during the day. So hopefully it's a little more wide open for everybody. But I do want to welcome council, staff, and residents to the Town of Essex 2023 budget walkthrough. So I'm pleased to have town administration present this budget, as this document outlines a financing approach intended to strengthen town's financial condition, address infrastructure needs, and maintain improved services the residents access regularly. With that said, I can tell you that over my career in municipal government, this has been the most challenging budget we've had to prepare. The current economic landscape has brought forward new challenges. but your administration has made significant efforts to reduce expenses and balance additional costs. With values rooted in fiscal responsibility and sound management principles, administration continues to focus on ensuring the town of Essex has efficient and effective systems in place to support our responsible growth. The financial decisions we make today are critical for our community's long-term sustainability. The process of assembling this budget requires significant effort by numerous staff across the entire organization, and I'd like to thank every single one of them for their time and effort in preparing the budgets. And I'd also like to directly thank our finance division, as Director Jarusevich mentioned, for their dedication and time in compiling a 2023 budget document. So back at this time, I'll turn it over to our Director of Corporate Services, Kate Jarusevich, to continue with the operating budget.
Okay. So just a quick welcome message from myself. As CAO Sweet mentioned, it was a very challenging year from a budgeting perspective. But on top of that, we threw an exercise at administration that hasn't been done in many years, and that was the budget reset year. A budget reset year, we'll get into exactly what that is, but instead of having a base budget that is developed from prior years, we actually don't provide any base budget, and we only provide actual data, and departments were asked to entirely rebuild their budgets. So this is a good exercise. And again, I'll get into that a little bit further in the slides, but on top of what we were facing in the economy, we also gave administration a pretty lengthy task in redeveloping their budget. There were some key themes in this year's budget, addressing inflation while maintaining service levels. Those were really at the top of mind when we were developing this budget. Also in the background was supply chain shortages. So it became increasingly difficult to obtain supplies, which also increased the price of supplies. And so to the next slide here. And so the next portion of this presentation is purely education. If you want to follow along in your budget document, we're on pages 3 and 4 right now. So what is a budget? So the Municipal Finance Officers of Ontario has a great video, and we're actually going to take a look at it.
Okay, I would like to help you understand how your municipality develops its budget. We always hear about them, and often this can feel like another language altogether. Before we get started, there's important information you should know. Ontario municipalities, like the municipality of MFOA, receive approximately 9% of all taxes collected, but are responsible for over 50% of the infrastructure. Let's start by looking at what the word budget means. Well, simply put, it's a planned, itemized summary of money that is coming into the municipality and how that money is spent for a specific period of time. It's very important to note that provincial government legislation in Ontario states money coming in equals money going out, also known as revenue equals expenditures or a balanced budget. The municipality of MFOA provides more than 60 services to the citizens of the municipality, so municipal council and administration always have to make difficult decisions to ensure this balancing takes place. There are two main components of the budget when looking at the money going out side of the scale. Operating pays for all the day-to-day activities of the corporation. This includes items such as salaries and wages, utilities, supplies, fuel, and insurance, just to name a few. The capital budget pays for all the new big investments or the rehabilitation of current assets under the municipality's control. So let's focus on how the municipality collects to pay for all these services. For every dollar that comes into the municipality, 64 cents comes from property taxes, 21 cents from grants and subsidies, and 15 cents from user fees and other sources. So now we've learned what a budget is, how municipalities collect money, and how they spend it. Now let's take a look at how these pieces work together. Money comes in through property taxes, grants and subsidies, and user fees. The money collected is required for both the operating and capital budget. We've already talked about the operating budget, including day-to-day expenses, but it also includes money for funding capital budgets. The capital budget pays for all the new big investments or the rehabilitation of current assets under the municipality's control. This connection is made through three methods. The capital levy method reflects a pay-as-you-go approach. The reserve fund method, which reflects a planned save now, acquire, or use later approach, and the debt payment approach. Okay, so let's recap. 1. A budget is a plan for money coming in and money going out. There are two building blocks to the municipality's budget: operating and capital. 2. The operating budget is like you're paying your house bills to keep the lights on. Just like in a normal household, our bills go up with inflation. 3. The capital budget is like your major outlays: vehicles, house, renovations, etc. 4. Money comes in from three sources: property tax levy, user fees, and grants and subsidies. 5. Money coming in is used to deliver over 60 services to municipality residents. 6. Municipal council and administration, with the input of the public, decide how to best balance the municipal budget guided by provincial legislation. And that is how your municipality develops its budget.
It's that easy. 3 minutes. Okay, so moving on. Try one more time. Sorry, just bear with us 1 second. Oh, got it. Did you click? Okay. Okay, so the budget reset year, we mentioned this quickly in the treasurer's welcome message, but this year, again, we did not provide administration with the base budget. They were asked to completely redevelop their budgets. This often does result in more accurate and relevant budget data, and it ensures that managers and directors are really looking at where their dollars are allocated and whether they're necessary or we can make adjustments within those departments. So this isn't an exercise we'll be performing, but we realized that with the onboarding of a new council, it was a great time to perform this exercise. And we hope to do it every 10 years with a slight revamp at each onboarding of council. Next slide. So balancing the budget. That video was very descriptive in how it explained balancing the budget, the revenues that go into it, and the expenses that go out. It was for illustrative purposes only, so we may or may not have those exact percentages, but balancing the budget is probably the toughest exercise from finances perspective. You have to make sure that you're stabilizing tax increases, but still providing the level of service that customers have grown to expect. So with prices going up, we need to make sure that we have the revenues to fund the services that we provide. Next slide, please. So the budget process, this is tough to see, but we're at page 3 on your budget document right now. So this has been a huge work in process across the whole organization. We actually kicked off the budget process back in May with some internal training at the new Fire Station 2. And departments worked diligently throughout the summer to get their budgets into finance. We developed the document through the fall. And because of an election year, we actually cannot adopt the budget in an election year. It has to be the year following an election. So that's why we're here in January. Next year, we hope to be here a touch earlier in November or December, as in prior years. Next slide. So you can see some key dates here. As I mentioned, May 4th, we did an internal training session. Each year, we will also present to council a budget initiation memo. So you'll see that on council agendas in the spring once we do kick off budget, and it includes timelines as well. We did launch a public engagement period. I will get more into that in the next few slides, but from June until August, we garnered public feedback on things that they might have wanted to see or questions they might have had on the budgeting process. We did receive one question, and it is posted on our budget website now. In early 2023, we circulated the budget document, so you received that last Monday, and here we are today at the walkthrough. So budget engagement. Budget engagement is a very important part of the public budgeting process. So residents pay for the services that the town provides, and in turn, they have a voice as to where those dollars are spent. So like we said, from June to August, we did provide opportunity and we have reopened the website up and are garnering input. We've also launched a heavy media campaign to garner resident input. In June of 2022, we presented a report to the past council, and this was on our budget engagement campaign. So we actually launched a two-part campaign. Next slide, please. Part one of the campaign was sort of a soft launch of budget engagement. So all of the check marks depict things that we've accomplished, and the circle bullet depicts the last outstanding item of part one. So as you can see, we have the dedicated budget webpage. We have links to all the previous budget documents within that website. We have a news feed for updates, upcoming events. And then there's also a budget calendar on there. There's learning tools. So the videos that you just watched are posted on this webpage as well. And there's an FAQ submission period, or now because we are on the input period, there's a feedback section that residents can go. The message is directly sent to finance. So, and then we will publicly respond to those questions through the website. So we have definitely amped up the engagement section of our budgeting process this year. And next will be, following this meeting, some media in newsprint as well. So part two, these are our plans, and we will come to council with a report with what we plan to do. But we do have some ideas in mind. Some of these include interactive budgeting tools. So the City of Windsor launched a very neat, I think it's neat, some might not, but I'm an accountant, how to balance your own budget through the City of Windsor webpage. So we're looking at something like that residents can go and see how difficult it is to balance the budget with limited revenues and increasing expenses. And the idea of a participatory budgeting campaign. This is where council can select some projects that require replacement or just require initiation, and residents can actually vote on them. So that's an idea for hopefully next 2024 budget year. So we did also launch 2 videos that you've seen circling social media. Again, this is to garner feedback from the budget document that we presented. Like we had said, residents play an important role in this, and their feedback is appreciated. When it comes to budget approval, just to give you a quick oversight, again, because of the election year, we can't approve a budget in an election year. So it has to be approved the year following an election, not typically the case. So next year, we would hope to get 2024's approval towards the end of 2023. This helps because administration can go into the year knowing what the year will bring. And it also helps to have a strategic plan accompanying that, which is going to be accomplished this year. So we are garnering feedback through this time right up until deliberations. The 13th and 14th will serve as deliberations where council can bring forward any suggested changes or proposals that they may have. What happens at those deliberation sessions is we will actually have a tracking sheet that is put up on the screen, and it will have basically the proposed budget and then any changes that have been brought forward since this date. Formal adoption occurs actually through a bylaw after council has approved it through resolution, hopefully at the end of the second full day of deliberations, but we'll see. We will hold more meetings if necessary. So now we are looking at pages 5 to 7 of your budget document. And as our CAO mentioned, this year was very challenging in terms of things that we had to consider when developing it. So the first thing that I'm going to go through is assessment growth. We did have MPAC present to this council. They will be back again this year, but taxation is one of our biggest revenues, so it's definitely worth noting. MPAC each year delivers what is known as our roll book or our assessment book, and this is the value of all of our properties within the municipality. So in essence, any taxation revenue we collect is based on that roll book. At the end of the day, administration puts forward their expense requirements, and we have to use our tax levy to try and fund that. So while we do notice assessment growth in a year, we can see that there's subdivisions going up throughout the town, growth is happening. With increased growth also means we have more houses to service. We have more people coming into town hall. We have more roads to plow. So I know that often people have the perception that assessment growth means more money. That's great. it does come with more expenses as well. So that's something that council has to consider. I'm not going to touch on the phase-in because as MPAC announced, this does not impact 2023 budget year. We have heard that there are rumors of a proposed announcement. We are also seeing AMO push MPAC to release the assessment for next year. And I also got correspondence from MPAC that if there is no pressure from the provincial government, their plan would be to introduce it Jan 1 of 2025. So it actually would not impact 24 budget year either. So I'm just going to leave it at that because we have a lot more other factors that did impact this year's budget year to go over. And so this is from 19 to 2022, the growth that the town of Essex has experienced. So 19 and 2020 were pretty exponential years of growth. We noted almost 4% in 2020. Unfortunately, COVID hit at that point, and you can see a decline from 2021 with a slight rebuild in 2022. And then for 2023, we have it estimated in and around 1.98. And we hope that in year, we even realize more than that. Part of that decline has been building delays that some of our developers have noted. So why does this matter and why is it a challenge to our budget? So often with the timing of MPAC's published assessment roll, we already have the budget formulated because we have to have it in time for the next budget year. So we are having to predict what the assessment growth might be. And we do have great data to rely on that, but as you can see, it's a moving target. It's not 2% every single year. There's many factors that can impact what that number is. So if we estimate our revenue too high, then we have a shortage to come up with in that year. And if we estimate our revenue too low, we might have increased taxes to a point we didn't need to. So, and because it is such a significant number in our budget, that's the main reason why it is a risk. Okay, so that's what I'm jumping ahead on you. Oh, no, because I'm running two different slideshows, so you're all good. Can we go to the graph, Abby? Perfect. This is tough to see, but we are in and around page 5, page 6. And so what this illustration is showing you is we're often compared to our local neighbors in the municipality. Municipalities such as Kingsville, Leamington, Amherstburg are all used as comparables across the county. And the total phase-in assessment, you can see that Essex has the lowest to work with out of the entire county. So, however, residents expect us to provide the same service, right? So they still expect the roads to be maintained, even with us starting off lower from the get-go. So the economic state and inflation. So I know that people have heard this word buzzing around. It's been hitting headlines lately, which it never would have 5 years ago. But what we have seen is record levels of inflation. And so inflation is the value at which goods arose from one point to the next. And it's important because it's the biggest indicator of what we can expect our expenses to be in the next year. So we have to increase our expenses upwards or downwards based on what CPI is telling. So you can see at October, this was at 6.9%. They did just publish January and we're still over a 6% amount of inflation. So it's coming down a touch, but not that significantly. And so it's important to note because over the past 10 years, the average increase in CPI remained steady at a 2%. So we really are in extenuating circumstances when it comes to incorporating inflation into the budget. So this is just an interesting graphic. Most municipalities aim to have a tax increase in and around inflationary levels. And this is because they need to make up that difference in inflation that has hit their expense line. So the red line depicts what inflation is at, and the blue line depicts what the town of Essex has raised their taxes at. So you can see in the years 16 and 17, we held steady in and around 1 to 2% tax increases in par with inflation. And what you can see is through 2020 and 2021, we had 0% increases at the town level, well under inflation. And from the year 2020 to current, we have been quite under inflationary levels. And I just want to note this is blended, so it includes the county and school board, which is why you're not seeing exactly a zero, because we'll get more into that in the next little while, but we have to incorporate them as well. Sorry. So we did talk about this, but why is CPI a risk factor? So this is a couple of points here that we may see additional revenues when it comes, because what has happened at this point, let me backtrack a little, is the Bank of Canada has actually started increasing its prime rate in order to try and bring the inflation rate down. So that comes with the good and bad. At the end of the day, we do earn more money on our reserve funds, but now if we want to take long-term debt financing, we pay a higher interest rate. And so interest rates have to be incorporated into the budget. And if we estimate our interest rates at the wrong amount, again, we're looking at that surplus deficit situation. So we did talk about this at the budget welcome message as well that we just went over. In 2022, there were many significant supply shortages noted. So there were many delays on capital projects. We noted a lot of post-budget approvals were required because of some of these delays and the costs that went up because of them. It was a global shortage that we experienced, and we are still experiencing it today. So what you will see in the capital budget is that we've actually had to get strategic in when we are replacing some of these assets if we want them to be delivered on time. So a fire truck can take upwards of a year to be delivered after it's been placed for order. So you may see it in this budget with delivery expected not until the next budget year. Okay, we're just about done this section and then I will break for a question period, just a few more slides. So reserves, we did go over what a reserve means, but in a nutshell, it is like the town's savings account. So the town categorizes its reserves into 3 different categories, contingency being one held for unexpected events, your capital related reserves being exactly as the name states, meant for capital items or your replacement of assets, and then other obligatory reserves, which would be legislatively mandated reserves like development charges. And so why are reserves a risk? We need to make sure that we're maintaining responsible levels of a reserve, just like you yourselves need to make sure that you have reasonable savings in the case of, an event in your house or anything like that. The town has to make sure that they're ready for an emergency should it come, but also needs to make sure it's not holding exorbitant amounts of reserves and asking for tax increases as well. Okay, so grant monies. So the town is in heavy reliance when it comes to grant monies, both on the operating side and the capital side. What you'll see in this document is that OMPF, the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, actually funds over $4 million of our operating budget. So we do get one of the largest contributions in the county from that fund. It's great, but also the main reason for risk in grants is if the government ever decided to discontinue that grant stream, we now need to come up with $4 million to fund our operations. The exact same goes for capital. So we have been receiving, previously was gas tax. They've changed the name. It is now known as the Canada Community Benefit Fund. And OCIF, the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund. Each year we receive in excess of 2.5 million from them. And these are finalized figures. We have gotten our notices from these grant agencies that this is the amount. Again, if they decide to discontinue the grants, we need to come up with the funding for that, right? So it's not a easily predictable amount. OCIF, for example, recently changed how they allocate their funds, and we noted a $250,000 decrease. So definitely significant factors. So level of service. Level of service is a term that you're going to hear very frequently in when it comes to the municipal world. And level of service is tough because it can be either a physical or intangible item. So to give you a couple of examples, one might note a level of service in how often their street is swept, or they might notice it in how often the plow goes by after a winter storm. but it could also be intangible. It could be how someone notes their experience coming into town hall, right? The friendliness of the customer service representatives that they deal with, how quickly somebody gets back to them with a response. So it's tough to measure. We are working towards that, but at the end of the day, the town has truly prided itself on delivering the highest level of service possible while operating fairly lean. And so in the recent years, you've seen the levels of growth. You've seen the high 4% in and around the 2019 year. And this means that in order for us to maintain a level of service, we have to address the increased expenses. We have to propose new positions to service that growth, as mentioned previously. And so at this point, I'm going to pass it over to our CAO, Doug Sweet. Abby is going to get ready to do a lot of clicking because it's an animated slide. And he's going to walk through this slide.
Thanks, Kate. So council, I did ask our finance I'm a visual person, right? So Kate's been talking about level of service, and a lot of words, but I thought it's important to show a graph. So the first thing you're going to see, which is going quicker than anticipated here, to the left is existing level of service, right? That's the level of service, it's balanced budget, and that's what it cost us. So to maintain that same level of service, exact same service in 2023, as Director Goosevetch mentioned, there's been increased costs, right? So it's showing there, just a second, showing there the expenses. So there is a gap now, right? You see where the deficit, there's a gap. So how do we maintain the same level of service? Basically, you have two choices. First choice is increase your revenues, which could be through your taxes. Or you could leave it with your second choice, where you decrease the level of service, right? So the resident would pay the same, but they're getting less service for that dollars. So I thought it was very important just to show this simple graphic, because every decision you're going to make during the budget affects your level of service, right? You're going to maintain the same level of service, or you're going to increase it even more, or you're going to decrease level of service. So felt quick graphic to kind of display that.
Perfect. Thank you, Doug. So we have one more slide and then we'll open the floor for questions. The last factor that was important when developing this budget was looking at the employee retention and labor market. So what we have seen in the past few years is a trend for retirements when it comes and high turnover when it comes to the municipal world. So we've had retirements internally, and so it has proven tough to find talent when it comes to filling those positions. And all important to note, the wages and salary of the town are almost over 25% of our operating budget. So we do rely heavily on our workforce to provide the services that CO Sweet mentioned. We have seen other comparable municipalities do some fairly drastic wage increases to try and attract employees. And the town of Essex has come up with creative ways to not have a financial impact necessarily. So one of the programs that was introduced to the town was a hybrid work from home policy. It was on a pilot program. And again, this is administration trying to come up with ways that aren't necessarily going to be a financial at the end of the day, while still attracting a workforce. So next is the investigation of a flexible work arrangement as well. So at this point, before we move
I
on.
just want to jump in one point. I asked our manager of economic development. A lot of people do not realize, so the town of Essex, we're the third largest employer for the town. County of Essex, Atlas Tubes, and the town of Essex. So we're right at the top for our own municipality.
Thank you. Next slide. So before we get into the fun stuff, I'm going to open the floor up for any questions that council may have.
Thank you, Director Rusevich. Are there any questions from members of council to our finance team? Councilor Verbeek?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So you mentioned that the impact assessment will not be coming forward until spring of 2025 unless there's pressure applied by the provincial government. So would you, Director Jarusovic, prefer we try to attempt to apply some pressure?
ultimately, from administration's perspective, we want a more accurate roll book. So right now, we are seeing some discrepancies because of newer builds versus older homes. So it does, the revamp of an assessment book does create a more equitable taxation system at the end of the day. But it also comes with administrative burden. So you have a 4-year phase-in that you're dealing with now. I think it's very important to note that the end goal of an assessment should not change the overall taxation collected by the town. So administration, what we would have to do is we'd have to look at taxes and we'd have to potentially reduce the tax rate if we noted a drastic increase, right? Because we should be collecting the same amount. So it's kind of a loaded question. It's a yes and a no. I think it's coming, which is good news from what we've heard. And I think given it may sound like 2 years, 2 years isn't long because it's really only one more budgeting year and we'll be incorporating. And it does give all of the administrators and tax collectors time to make sure they're applying it properly. There'll also be quite a bit of taxation policies when it comes to it because, per legislation, we cannot drastically increase somebody's taxes. So that has to be addressed as well. And right now the county is working with all tax treasurers to make sure that doesn't happen.
Any further questions from members of council? Councilor Garen?
For everyone else. Okay, I like the presentation so far. Can we get a copy of what okay, great. So a few questions, we're over on a tax bill question. So some tax bills just came out, say this month, right? For is that well, I just received my recent tax bill, like what I owe for like the month and for the next 10 months or whatever. Does that include already the county increase? Okay.
So those were the pre-authorized letters. So anyone who automatically has the taxes taken out. And so administration this year built in a 4.5% increase. The reason for that being at the end of the year, it's a true up month. And what we've experienced as residents prefer less being taken out near the December month than more. So as of right now, yes, it would.
Level of service. So Doug was talking about maintaining that level of service from 2022 to 2023 and the parameters of what we want to do there. When we look at trying to maintain the same level of service from year to year, do we take into consideration the growth between the 2 years?
And we have a really nice new slide this year that hopefully explains that as well, all the impacts.
And further through the chair, discussion on money in the slide showed what percentage comes from property tax versus grant subsidies and user fees, and it was an example. Do we know what our percentages are built in for this budget?
Yeah, more to come. Sorry, Joe.
Okay. Along with roll book values between 2022 and 2023, like I'd like to know what percentage of growth goes against operating expenses in this budget versus what percentage goes towards capital.
Through the chair. So this year we've budgeted 1.98% of growth. And you'll see that only 150,000 is going towards capital. So I can pull the exact numbers for you, but right now only 150,000 is going towards capital and approximately 250 would be going towards operating, but let me get you exact numbers.
Further through you, the point you're talking about, if grants such as CMPF were to disappear, can you educate us on how long that CMPF has been around? What were we doing prior to that? And I don't know why we would be thinking we would lose it, because I would think losing just our share of say $4 million would I think something like that, or whatever that percent money is, would cripple any municipality. So give just a little education and background on that type of grant.
So we have been receiving all three of those streams of grant revenues for well in excess of 10 years. So I agree. We don't have any reason to believe that they're going to go away. But we have seen a trend to municipalities, especially when it comes to the OCIF. They've been tweaking those grant streams. So when we start to see the provincial government play with the allocations, it gets a little bit concerning. And so I have no reason to believe they're going away, but it's just something we have to have in the back of our head when we see the provincial government starting to take changes.
Elizabeth, you want to please continue?
Okay, through the chair. Sorry about that. Okay, so we did a high level snapshot of the budget, and what we were proposing is 68 million in total revenues and total expenses, and we are presenting you a balanced budget. We have to, per the Municipal Act, that is a requirement of it. And so we did discuss this previously, but there were three sort of main trends when we developed this year's budget. The first being making sure that we address inflation while looking at our service levels. The second being ensuring that we are incorporating any of our strategic values from our past strategic plan with a really strong focus this year on customer service and innovation. And then the third was looking at where can we get alternative revenue streams. So sort of in par with the innovation line, how can we come up with different revenues that we might not have experienced in the past? So the operating budget includes the increases that are, we believe, necessary to staff complements to ensure that we are maintaining our service levels. And the main areas that we addressed when it came to new positions was bylaw enforcement and customer service. And you'll see those a little later on. The unapproved, changed, or proposed tax increase to the average household in the town of Essex is presented at 4.12%. This equates to an extra $10 per month for the average bill. The average household was valued at $189,000 per MPAC's records. So this is what the average house would be worth in taxation assessment dollars for 2023. For capital, we are proposing a budget of 13.1 million. So we've gone through this. We're going to now go into the taxation section of the budget, and MPAC was here previously. They skipped over this video, but I think it will really help make how we collect taxation dollars and how we rely on the assessment click. So we're going to watch it today.
You know SEO. What if you could do it smarter and faster? With Wix, you get a site.
Property taxes are based on your home's value. What you might not know is that an increase in your home's value doesn't necessarily mean your taxes will go up. To explain, let's take a look at how your property taxes are calculated. Imagine there's a town that only has 3 homes, and they're each worth a different amount. The total cost to provide all of the town's services is $1,200. This is collected through property taxes. Each homeowner pays property taxes based on their home's assessed value. So we take the total cost of services and divide it by the total property value. This tax rate is applied to all the houses to get enough money to pay for the town's services. Each homeowner pays according to the assessed value of their home, and every 4 years, the houses are reassessed. Let's say all 3 properties have gone up equally in value. The total cost of services hasn't changed, but the total property value has increased. When this happens, there will be a decrease in the tax rate. Now, when we apply that new rate on all the homes, everyone still pays the same. Now, let's say another 4 years has gone by, and these homes are reassessed. During this time, the house on the right gains more market value than the other 2. The total value of all the homes have increased, which means the town has to calculate a new tax rate. With this new tax rate, the first 2 homes will actually pay less than the home on the right that was reassessed at a higher value. Since the cost of services hasn't changed, the town doesn't need to collect more property taxes on the whole. However, since property taxes are based on a home's value, taxes for each individual home could potentially go up or down based on the rest of the homes. So, what happens when the cost to provide services goes up? Well, it means more property taxes need to be collected from every home and a new tax rate is calculated. To get the new rate, we take that amount that the town now needs and divide it by all of the property values. The new rate is applied to all the homes, and now everyone has to pay the new tax amount to continue to fund the town's services. So, let's review. 1. Property taxes are based on the assessed value of a home. If all assessments go up equally, everyone pays the same. 2. If all assessments do not go up equally, there's a redistribution of the tax. 3. If the town's cost to provide services increases, the municipality may choose to increase the tax rate. When this happens, everyone pays their share of that increase. And that explains the relationship between property value and property taxes.
Okay, so now we're going to go through what makes up the town's tax rate. So we are very unique across the county in that we separate our tax rate into different levies. So the general municipal levy is the rate charged for just general services that all residents are entitled to. So it may be for town hall, for example. Any resident can walk into town hall and use the services provided here. We also have urban and rural levies, and these were created at amalgamation, and they're based on geographic areas. So urban levy serves anyone in wards 1 and 4, being the urban areas of the town of Essex. And it is for the stormwater expenses involved in storm sewers, mainly in wards 1 and 4. The rural levy is applied to our rural areas, wards 2 and 3, and it is for stormwater collection in those areas specifically. And so the mentality there was that, residents on farm didn't necessarily want to pay for services that you might storm sewers that were installed in Ward 1, for example. So that's the reason for that separation of levy. Very important to highlight this year is the garbage collection levy. So the garbage collection levy is truly an in and out from a town perspective. We recently released an RFP in 2022 to renew our garbage collection contract, and it came in at 60% higher from our 2015 contract. So these are costs that we bill the residents directly on their tax bill. And then when we collect those monies, we pay them to the service provider for the garbage collection services that they provide. So overall, from 2022 to 2023, we noted a price increase of 36%, but we also had a deficit for 2022 that we need to cover because of the increase of expense that happened mid-2022. Also incorporated into our tax rate are the County of Essex levy and the school board levies. So as you seen from some of the videos that we played earlier, legislatively, as a lower tier municipality, we have to make sure that we are collecting the taxes for those organizations and remitting them back to them. So again, an in and out when it comes to those. So to Councillor Guerin's question, this was the slide I was referring to where we break down assessment growth. And so you can see this year assessment growth was predicted at $332,000. And actually that was spent entirely on operations, just for clarification. 150 that is put towards capital, which I will explain further on, is part of the tax rate increase that we are proposing. So assessment growth, we noticed an additional, what you're seeing on the far right-hand side column is the impact of the tax rate. So we start with our base tax rate and we look at all of the impacts. And so what you're seeing is assessment growth, because it's additional monies in, actually reduces our tax rate off the hop. We have total impacts of prior council decisions. So these are broken down a bit further when we talk about wages, but they are impacts of the collective agreement. So in 2018, the town entered into a 4-year remuneration plan with through the collective agreement, and that is a result of that. It also includes benefit increases that we noted through the year through our benefit providers. So the 3 new levies that are being proposed this year. The first one I want to highlight is the 2023 roads levy. So you're seeing an increase dedicated towards roads of $266,000. So 1.6% tax increase. I think this is very important to note because back in October, we had our consultants present to us our asset management plan. And what they told us in that plan, and you'll see it later on in capital, is that roads is currently the biggest underfunded portfolio at the town of Essex. I'm sure you all feel that just by driving on the roads in the town of Essex. So instead of making it an overall generalized contribution, we dedicated it to roads, being that we had a consultant give us information saying, you need to start putting more money towards your roads if you want to rehabilitate them on time. So they actually proposed to us an overall increase of 2.6% over 15 years. Again, administration was trying to be cognizant of the times right now in the economy. And so we are recommending to phase that increase in. So rather than a 2.6 this year, we're recommending 1.6 this year. And then we'll reevaluate next year and go from there. You'll see two other new levies presented, 2023 new capital levy. So what we have noticed is growth occurring in the town, right? And I will touch on this further in capital with how we fund capital assets, but when it comes to funding anything new, so if it's not a replacement or anything like that, we don't have a funding source. It has to be either done through taxation or through a contingency type of reserve. So we're recommending setting this up. We know that we have some new capital expenditures coming because of development. A good example would be a linking sidewalk trail to link communities, to link developments to other infrastructure in the town. So we currently don't have a funding source for that, but we know that these expenditures are up and coming. Again, the whole point of these minimal tax increases is so that when the infrastructure is required, we're not requiring taxpayers to pay 4%, right? So we're trying to minimize that burden. That's the overall goal here. So the biggest increase that you're noting there is 1.8%, and that's just due to garbage. So the garbage levy had an overall net impact of $300,000 to the budget. And town actually used stabilization efforts. So we found monies from previous years' savings to reduce that. It actually should have been a 2.4% increase. So we do believe that we've exercised fiscal responsibility by trying to get that increase as low as possible. Operating expenses, so this is the inflationary impacts that we discussed previously. We're noting a 1.44%. And the reason you're not seeing it as higher is I think in due part to the budget reset, we were able to find some savings through that exercise. So proposed new positions has a net impact of 1.82%, a $300,000 bottom line impact. And we will go through those in quite some detail in the next few slides. Budget reset adjustments, we're noting approximately 500,000 or a reduction again to the tax rate of 4%. These would be things like newfound grants that we were able to, and different revenue streams that we were able to find as well. So this is a new graphic, but I love it. I think it's, it really shows our budget in a nutshell. So now looking at the tax rate, this would be page 9 of your budget document. Some may consider this the most important graphic, but really the main focus is the bottom line. It's highlighted in blue. Sorry, second bottom line, the total average increase for all wards. So at the end of the day, what is a house in the town of Essex? What is an average house going to see as a result of this budget? The average house on an annual basis would see an average increase of $123. That equates to approximately $10 a month. This includes education levies and the County of Essex levy. Another great graphic, page 10, would be how are property taxes distributed. So we talked about those ins and outs previously. At the end of the day, of that $123 that we collect, the town doesn't get to keep it all, right? They keep more in the realm of $85. So the rest is a check written directly to the school boards and the County of Essex for their services. So this was an interesting graphic once we put it together. And what this graphic shows is, because we are always comparing ourselves to our neighboring municipalities, right? Well, what was Amherstburg's tax increase? What was LaSalle's tax increase? I think it's very important to note that a 1% across the county is drastically different, right? So a 1%, and we have looked at it just on a residential basis. The reason we did that is because, as MPAC told us previously, residential is the main source of tax revenue. So we thought this was the best indicator. Also, these were the most relevant numbers that we could get from some of the municipalities. So at the end of the day, a 1% tax increase in LaSalle is 374,000. And a 1% in the town of Essex is half of that. So I think that's very important to note, right? When we want to compare to our neighbors, it's not comparing apples and apples, right? We are expected to deliver the same level of service, but our collection of taxes is very different. So just looking at how much taxes we collect, again, focusing on residential because that is the biggest tax source per MPAC across the different municipalities. If we look at it for 2022, the town of Essex is at the bottom in and around the realm of 15 million. Again, it doesn't include other sources such as industrial or commercial, but we know that for the town of Essex, residential takes 70% of our assessments. So it is a very good indicator. So before we go any further, I think it's a good time to open it up to any questions that anyone might have on taxes, tax rates.
Mr. Rusevich, any questions from members of council to our finance team? Okay, seeing none.
I'm wondering if we should do a quick break. What are your thoughts, CAO Suite? I only say that because we're getting into the heavy stuff next. So I'll read the room. Is everyone okay to keep going or do they want to take a quick 5-minute bio break? Okay. Perfect. I'm good with that too. Yep, I'm good. Okay, so what I am going to do now is highlight some of the more significant impacts to our budget this year. So I'm right now referring to page 12 of our budget document. So the first significant impact, and I'm going to explain the columns first before I go any further. What you're seeing, and this is throughout the entire document, is summary data. It shows you the 21 actuals that we've are audited and actually realized. It shows you the 22 budget. So that was previous year's budget, and it shows what we're proposing for 23. So from an administrative standpoint, we always look at the change from the 22 budget because that's going to be the tax impact. So the most important column to me is the last two showing our proposed change and what that percentage is. So what you can see is for amounts added to taxes and special levies, these are the rates for urban and rural that we referred to earlier. They noted an increase of 165,000 in operating expenses. This is increased contractor cost, whether it be to fuel, whether it be to wages. Again, not borne by the town, but a levy that we collect from residents. This also includes the garbage increase that we levy out to residents of 300,000. So these are separate from general tax, but still collected as a tax. Conditional and unconditional grants, you're seeing a slight decrease there, 300,000. I noted it earlier. We received less from OCIF this year. They've revamped how they allocate their monies. It's based on the replacement value of assets. So I expect it to be more in the realm of the 1.5 million that we received this year, not 1.8 that was received in 2020. So contributions from developers. So this comes with good and bad news. The contributions from developers is expected to drastically increase. So this is actual money collected on development. So when a developer comes to build in the town of Essex, they pay development fees. And those development fees are meant for new infrastructure as a result of that growth. So legislatively, we have to put into a reserve dedicated to growth related assets. So you're seeing an increase of $2.2 million, but that money does go directly into a reserve to fund new growth assets. That's a 110% increase. So on the horizon, some large residential developments occurring in wards 1 and 2, predicted at almost 246 housing units. And for wards 3 and 4, we're predicting over 123 new housing units. So when I say good and bad, the bad side of it is the, from a financial perspective, the elective waivers that the town has in place. So the town has chosen to waive 50% of development charges for residential in the town of Harrow, effective for budget year 2023. It will phase down for 24 to 25%. We've also administratively had to deal with Bill 23. That doesn't impact this budget year as of right now because our bylaw does not expire until 2024. So what happens is when we choose as a town to waive development fees that should have been collected, we need to come up with the money ourselves or from other sources, whether it be taxation, other revenues. And so I will get into that a little bit further about the funding plan that we've created on how to not drastically increase taxes to fund those waivers. So what you're seeing under interfund transfers is an increase. I'm just gonna follow my notes here. Bear with me. I'll scroll down a little bit. Mainly due to the DCs collected and the requirement that we. Oh, I'm on. Sorry, one sec. Jumped. There we go. So interfund transfers from a revenue perspective, those have increased because we, again, looked for alternative revenue streams and we were able to use some development charges we had in reserve to fund long-term debt payments of growth-related assets. So that was a new revenue that we introduced this year. The next allocation you're looking at is, okay, just gotta keep scrolling down. Continuing with the interfund transfers revenue. So on top of, we're looking at the 1.26 million. So on top of the long-term debt we were able to fund, we also noted that we were collecting more money from landfill reserve. So that money has been included there as well. Investment and other income. So due to the budget reset, this was one of the cleanup areas that we noted. So we noted an additional 100,000 in lease revenue that wasn't previously budgeted. And our bank interest revenue is expected to increase slightly as well. License and permit fees. So with an increase in building, they have to take permit out to build. So we're going to notice an increase in that of approximately 300,000. The prior year surplus. So when I mentioned that administration developed ways to stabilize those tax increases where possible, in 2021, we noted a surplus due to COVID. So many operations weren't running. We had budgetary savings and we took this money and applied it towards the garbage increase, right? To make it not as drastic of an increase, to bring it down from the 2.4 to the 1.8. And we also used it to offset some of the waived development charges, so that it wasn't a huge impact, as large of an impact as it could have been to taxpayers. Property taxation, you're noting an increase of over 5% here. And that is mainly due to assessment growth of 1.98, but the proposed tax increase as well, which is around 2.4% from a general perspective. User fees and charges. This is mainly the landfill revenue increase of the 800,000, and it goes directly into reserve. So this is just monies that we collect as the host municipality, and it was part of the budget cleanup as well. So an in and an out. So I think what's really important to note here is that it looks almost as if our operations have increased by 15%. That is not the case. If you take out development charges, which go directly into reserve, if you take out the landfill monies, which go directly into a reserve, and if you take out the surplus amounts, which was a one-time stabilizing effort, we're really sitting in and around a 6%. So I think it's important to note that. So I'll go through the expenses and then we'll open the floor up one more time. So looking at the expenses, the first one that you're looking at would be contracted services. So in our sanitary sewer and water divisions, we noted from our provider Aqua some substantial contract increases in excess of $500,000. Garbage is included in there as well, which was an increase of over 300. And the roads and winter control budget, an increase of over 130,000. So debt servicing, you're noting an overall impact of 154,000. And we did have some debt fall off for the 2023 year. So we had some street lighting and the salt shed public works programs fall off. But we do have Ward 1 storm sewer works that we anticipate taking debt on in 2023. All prior approved council decisions. We won't see any new debt impact from this council until 2024. So when it comes to interfund transfers expense, these are the DCs that we discussed earlier. So that's the increase there that we have to put into development charge reserve. The landfill increase, so the additional revenues that we are putting in, and you'll see later on, but most of our landfill revenues go towards asset replacement. So nearly 60% of the landfill revenues collected go to asset replacement. And then there was also over 900,000 that we dedicated towards the deficits that we noted in garbage, as well as asset management plan. So materials and supplies, you're seeing an increase there. Approximately 75,000 was put towards IT. We have introduced some fairly extensive security programs and security monitoring programs, as well as most software has been switched over to subscription-based. I'm sure many of you have noted that in your households as well, that it's more of a monthly fee structure now than a one-time purchase. Public Works fuel and roads and winter control fuel is classified here as well. So from 2022 budget development to now, gas has been a very large increase, as we're all seeing, just to drive by a gas station, right? So miscellaneous services. So the reason for a decrease here is for 2020 and through to 2022, we actually had all COVID expenses classified there. And so what we've done new this year is, now that COVID is in the endemic, we've every department has accounted for them separately, and we've removed it from that budget line. We also don't have a grant to fund those expenses anymore. So I think that's important to note, that for a few years, the provincial government was helping municipalities with funding those expenses. Professional fees, you're seeing an increase of 150,000. So we have some studies anticipated in the sanitary, sewer, and water divisions that are mainly due to growth. And for rents and financial services, we've recently launched cloud permitting, which is electronic building permit software. There is a convenience fee charged by the credit card companies of 3% or more. The average is in and around 3%. But administration also has implemented the 3% convenience charge for users who want to pay by credit card, so that it's not a burden to other taxpayers or to other users. It's being covered through that convenience fee. Not going to talk about salaries and wages because we do a full in-depth slide on that. And then utilities. So it is appearing as a decrease, but what we've noted is that the LED expansion of streetlights has resulted in significant cost savings. So we did notice some cost savings there. So before I hit and go on to capital, does anyone have any questions on some of those significant changes that we just went over? I will go through them on a department level basis as well. So that's the overall.
Thank you, Director Savich. I do have a couple of comments myself. At some point, I'm wondering if the new term of council can get an update on the LED file, the LED streetlight file, and how many are left to do, because that's awesome that we're having some cost savings there. I'd like to get all those LED lights up and running. And so just to the Aqua, so the Aqua contract, I think you said 500,000, but in here it's like 1.1 million. Is it 1.1 million? Please.
Through the chair. So this is overall. So just a portion of that was the Aqua contract. Garbage is also in that line as well, as is roads and winter control increases.
Thank you very much. And at some point, I'd like to hear if we're getting feedback from the public with that budget email that we have. Any questions from members of council to our director or finance team? Okay, seeing none, you can keep on motoring.
Okay, so we're not at the capital point yet, but really what this is illustrating is that it all ties in together. So if you looked at the operating summary on page 12, what you had seen is that we're showing a surplus of $150,000. That $150,000 is actually flowing into our capital program. So you can see here, the capital program shows a $150,000 deficit. And at the end of the day, if you head to the next slide, it's showing a balanced break-even budget. So it's just important to note that any excess operating monies we use towards capital, and then that balances our budget. So just back to the capital slide, if you don't mind, Abby. The capital summary here, we will go through this in depth when we hit the capital section, but a $13.1 million capital programs suggested for the 23 budget year, and 10 million of that for property supported initiatives, property tax supported. So the forecast years. So for operating, we will not be asking council for adoption in principle of the operating forecast. And the reason for that is that we've seen such volatility over the past few years that administration, we feel we need to see how inflation plays out. We don't think that it would be extremely relevant at this point in time, right? So the further out you try to forecast, the more inaccurate a budget becomes. And council is also required to adopt the forecast each year for that budget year. So we use it as a guiding principle and to help us as an internal tool. And council, you can definitely glance at it, but we aren't asking for adoption at this point. We will ask for that in year when the budget year comes. Capital, however, we will ask for adoption in principle. And you'll see that it's for your term of council through to 2027. We won't be doing a detailed review of capital because, again, capital is much like operating. You need to approve it in the year that it occurs. So it's subject to change as well. Just because it's on the paper doesn't mean it won't change. It's just the important note there. So page 14, I'm not going to go through. It's just this breaks down all of the different revenues and all of the different expenses the town receives. And so I believe that was Councillor Guerin's question. And I think this next illustration breaks it down quite nicely. So you can see how our budget is funded. So in total, we had 68 million in revenues, and 21 million of that came from taxation. We had internal transfers of 16 million. So the internal transfers, again, are monies coming out of reserve. And things like sanitary sewer or water are held in reserve because they're user rate funded. So they're funded from those reserves each year. Also, the internal transfers may cover the DCs, the development charges that we talked about earlier, to cover long-term debt. User fees, this is things like water and sanitary rates, water and sanitary sewer rates, and garbage rates. Grants are coming in at 10 million of the budget, and we reviewed those. Those include OCIF that flow through to capital. They include the CCBF, Canada Community Benefit, that flows through to capital, as well as OMPF. Okay. And looking at it from just a purely operating perspective, what you can see is 55 million goes towards operations. And at the end of the day, nearly 40% of taxation is what funds the operating budget. So taxation is our most heavily relied upon source. User fees are a close second at 25% of the total operating revenue budget. From a capital perspective, we're just going to touch on this briefly because we do have the afternoon scheduled for the capital walkthrough. But the asset management reserve is very essential to the replacement of the town's capital assets. So this reserve was established when we underwent our first asset management plan. And it is used to fund the replacement or rehabilitation or upgrade of all existing town assets. And basically, when any asset requires replacement, this is the preliminary funding source after grants, of course. So most municipalities face this challenge, and that is being underfunded when it comes to how do we come up to with the money to replace town's assets. So looking at other revenues and grant funding, other revenues may be development charges, anything that we might have had in an obligatory reserve. We hold cemetery funds as well. Those are used mainly for operations though. Grant funding, they also sit in a reserve, and we've gone through those pretty extensively at this point. You will, and again, we're going to go through all these columns when we hit the capital breakthrough, but you will see other types of revenue. Certain projects we cost share with the school board or the town of Amherstburg. And then taxation, we talked about that flow through. We have $150,000 this year flowing through to the capital budget. Long-term debt is also another source. So when it comes to revenues, $13 million right now is being used to fund capital revenue. And as I mentioned, asset management plan reserve being very heavily relied upon, funding almost nearly 50% of our capital budget program. Okay. So this is going to be a very crucial slide, almost like a cheat sheet for council when it comes to deliberations. So I actually have it in the slideshow twice. We're going to talk about it now, and we're going to talk about it in capital. And this is how the town funds capital assets. So what you'll see in the capital budget is we have an asset status. It may be new, it might be a replacement, or it might be an upgrade. And these are the different funding sources. So you'll see that what can we use the asset management reserve for? Currently, the funding is 100% of replacement and 50% of upgrade, but we can't use AMP for new assets. So when it comes to grant funding, yes, we can use, depending on the specs of the grant program, of course. And so we'll go over this in more detail. Development charges can use it for anything related to growth. Also has to be within the limits of our development charge study. It's important to note. So when we undergo a development charge study, they list specific projects that are up and coming with a little bit of a buffer. And so it has to fall within that realm. So I don't need to go over this in too much more detail because we've already touched upon it as well. Within the municipal act, so it is legislated that council resolved to have certain reserve funds. We have the contingency, which we've already talked about. An example could be winter control. We have our AMP reserve, and then we have our other obligatory reserve. So new this year to the budget is displaying some estimated budget balances for reserves. So you can see that from 21 to 22, we're expecting a pretty drastic decrease to our overall reserve balance. We're actually expecting it to go down nearly $9 million. The main reason for this is all of the delays that we've noted in capital projects because of COVID. We expect that hopefully by the end of 22, potentially trickling into 2023, we're able to complete most of those projects. So we have made efforts to start to replenish those reserves to more appropriate levels. Within contingency reserves is the water and sanitary sewer reserves. So, and as well as winter control, any public works kind of urban levy reserves are held there. It's important to note that many of those are legislatively required. So we can't use them to fund the tax rate. They are dictated to us by the financial plan that we adopt through consultants. So they're not monies that are just available to be used for general purposes. Now we'll go through expenses, and you're seeing the biggest source of expense, contracted services, when it comes to operating. And that's coming in at about $22 million. This is again, mainly the aqua contract and the garbage contracts and various road maintenance contracts. Internal transfers is coming in at 18 million. And so this is monies that we have to put into reserve, development charges mainly, and in-year grants that might have to go into reserves as well. So I'm going to go through the breakdown of operating, and then we'll have a question period. So what you can see here is that the main source of expenses for operations is transfers we put into reserve. And one of those biggest transfers to reserve is the landfill compensation that we put towards asset management initiatives. Okay, second would be salaries and wages at nearing 25%, just about 24. Okay. So our capital program mainly contracted out at 13.1 million. So at this point, I'm going to open the floor up if there's any questions on the allocation, anything like that before we go through long-term debt.
Jurcevic, any questions from members of council to our finance team and our director? Councilor Verbeek.
Madam Mayor, just a quick note. I can't say how much I appreciate the way that it's being put out for us today. Every single question that I've been prepared to ask, I wait, and 3 slides later, you're answering it. I noticed it even happened with Councillor Guerin, so I really appreciate this. The way it's being presented.
I just need some clarification on the expenses for like rents and financial services, 2021 comparable to 2023. In 2 years, it's gone up 103%. What is actually rents and financial services? It went from 213,500 in 21 to like I say, 103% more, 434,000. Did we buy more buildings? Did we buy more properties? Is the financial services we're offering that much more than we did a couple years ago?
Through the chair. So this is directly attributed to cloud permitting. So when we did online building permits, financial services is where we classify like our bank charges as well. And so we noted very drastic increases. Anne Marie's just pulling the actuals for me. But again, we realized that about a quarter of the way through the year, and we implemented that recovery fee.
Would that be where when residents used to come in and pay their taxes and use credit card, we used to get those service charge dings? Was that line where that line on the beat? So how didn't we have like $70,000 or $80,000 that 1 year alone? Wouldn't that have been back like? Did we stop that before 2021?
We did, yeah. So yeah, you're correct.
Okay, seeing none, we'll keep going.
I don't really know how we're doing for time, so I'm hoping that this is okay, sounds good. Okay, so long-term debt. So this is great timing because on Monday, this council recently adopted a long-term debt management plan. And very important in guiding administration as well as yourselves in how the town is going to use long-term debt in the future. One of the biggest pieces of legislation to be kept in the back of our mind is the Municipal Act, as well as any specific regulations. And each year, the ministry provides administration and council with an annual repayment limit. So that is defined within the policy. And what that annual repayment limit says is, from a ministry perspective, for 2022, it was 5.5 million. That's the amount of new debt payments that you could take without having to get additional approval. And so what that amount equates to is 25% of our own source revenues. And the policy that we have chosen that has been adopted by council is 15% of that. And so the next graph is a good illustration because it shows the projected debt versus what the policy was recommended at. So the line you can see in red is the 15% limit, and you can see that the initiatives proposed within this capital budget and operating budget are well within that prescribed limit. The next slide is an important slide as well, reflected on page 19 of your document. It shows what the long-term debt balances are year by year, all the way through the forecast. So what you can see is 2023 includes an estimated balance of 25.35 million. We do anticipate taking Essex Streetscape on December 31st. We always assume in year. And 2025, you will see later on in the capital discussions, we anticipate having to take some debt for replacement projects. Right now, we've earmarked it for replacement of fire stations. So based on the forecast, what we are predicting at this point in time is potentially by 2027, under $20 million of debt for this term of council. So the next few pages, I'm not going to go into detail through, in heavy detail through each line, but I just want to explain the layout of it and how you yourselves can take it back and read it. What you can see is the principal balances on this page. So 2021 actual principal balances, all defined by department. And then you can see what 22's is estimated to be. It is not audited, 21's is audited. 2023 is the proposed. So again, those two far right columns being the most important in my opinion, because any positive shows new debt. So you can see that under council, we have the $6.6 million, and that would be new debt for the Essex Streetscape project. So the next page, you can see we have it separated by user rate versus property tax. That first slide was property tax. So that's debt that's supported by the general property tax base. This second portion, it's all within one page on your budget document, but this separates it out by user rated and amounts added to taxes. User rated is again paid by those specific benefiting users, and amounts added to tax is actually debt that we take on behalf of our property residents. So it might be drainage debentures or the shoreline loan program. So again, that far right column, the proposed change being fairly important as it shows the principal debt being paid off from 22 to 23. So you can see the overall change in the total remaining principal balance. We anticipate it to go up by 3.9 million from 22 to 23. This is a second way to look at debt, and it's important because any long-term debt payment has an impact on the tax base if it is property tax funded. So again, the far right columns being the most significant, you can see that for Public Works Administration, we did pay off some debentures. So we had some salt shed replacement was funded through long-term debt that was paid off or is going to be paid off in 23. Council had new debt come on for 23, that being the Harrow Streetscaping project that was funded partially through long-term debt. And then the paved roads is just another portion of the debt falling off. Oh, sorry. Also important to mention is the storm sewer debt of 315,000, a previously approved council project. That was for storm water improvements in Ward 1. So at the end of the day, the overall change is an increase in debt payment, total debt payments of $415,000. Okay, and then when it came to the forecast, we just wanted to note that we did build approximately $5 million in there for mainly Fire Station 3, but likely other replacement projects as well. That will be necessary, and you'll see that in the afternoon discussion of asset management. Because we'll need to come up with some alternate funding to make sure we don't drain our asset management plan reserve. Okay, so the net budget by cost center, I'm not going to go into in-depth detail on this. So I'm just going to explain the layout of it. It shows the net impact of a cost center. So we have over 100 cost centers here at the town. And they may fall into different divisions. But what you can see is we have actuals, we have the 22 budget, the 23 proposed, and the change. So this is net of any revenues. So the far right column, I'm going to just look at accessibility, for example. You can see they had a negative 4.76% decrease. So they either found additional revenues of $100 or they decreased expenses of $100. If it's a positive, it means that cost center increased. We don't place heavy focus on this because we've had new administration come in. They may allocate their costs differently. You'll see when we get to each department, it's important to look at it as an overall. So this is just providing you another level of detail, but now what we're going to do is get into the overall department summaries. Okay, so there y'all are up on the screen. So we have our new council with us today, and the organizational structure, you guys have seen these a few times over now, so I'm not going to go into it in detail. This is more for public information purposes. It also helps in summarizing the different impacts you're going to see through the divisions. But now we're going to go through the personnel overview, and personnel being nearly 25%, as we mentioned, of the town's total expenses. So we created a new process this year when it came to position requests, and we required each division to submit a business case if they thought that they had a need for a position in their department. And so these business cases were approved by the director, and then they were sent on to the CAO as well as the treasurer. And at the end of the day, we ended up with over 15 business cases presented to administrative levels. And what you are seeing is 3 proposed full-time positions and 3 proposed part-time positions. The total impact is approximately 300,000. So this is all on page 27 of your budget document. This is the overall change to the town's wages from 22 to 23. You'll notice the 698 was previously approved council decisions, so it included the salary increases and the benefit increases. And then when we look at property tax supported, we've just split the positions out here by whether they're funded through property taxes or user rates. So what we are going to do now is pass it over to CAO Sweet. He is going to go through all of the positions that are listed from property tax supported onwards.
The Mayor Bondi. Thank you, Director Drusevich.
Next slide, guys.
So just kind of go high level of the positions you see on the screen there. After this, if you have any more details, you can ask a question and the appropriate director can give you some more details. Or after today's session, when you have further questions, please follow up with that director. So the first one up there is a full-time horticultural position. So currently there's only one full-time operator for the entire municipality, responsible for all horticulture throughout all 4 wards. So with the increase we've had in landscaping, the streetscaping, the beautification that's happened in all 4 wards, there's definitely a need to have that second body to assist. It's been a real struggle just for one person, as you can see the size of our municipality. Second position is our full-time junior planner. So this is kind of an in and out, to use a finance term. We currently have a contract position assisting in this role right now. People know Mr. Jeff Watson, who is officially be ending his contract in 2023. So we're looking at filling that same role that Jeff did with some additional duties as a junior planner. As we've talked a lot with growth, there's been a high demand on our building and planning division. So it's definitely a need within our municipality to have that position remain. Third full-time position is a position that's currently already there. It's called full-time EA HR. Truly right now, it's an HR supervisor. People know Ms. Stevens. 70% of her role is HR. 30% is to help right now in terms of the office of the CEO. What we've encountered though, it's very difficult for that one person to do both roles with the growth. HR, for example, they're not getting to all the health and safety, employment engagement initiatives, staff training, and just last year they had 80 recruitment positions. So we just need to enhance her supervisor or HR role. In terms of the EA, it's not so much the EA role, it's assistance with the communications department. This role will be able to assist our manager of communications department of 1. You'll see your budget document, the agritourism document, all these things we're doing in-house, the videos are saving us thousands and thousands of dollars, but also takes away to the day-to-day communication activities he's doing. So that role would assist with that. The next 2 I'm going to talk about are part-time roles. And the first one is we're requesting 2 part-time bylaw officers. So I'm not sure if new members have followed the previous council, but especially with the addition of the short-term rental bylaw, we know we're going to have additional bylaw calls. So this is a need we've saw. We currently only have 1 bylaw officer now for the entire municipality. We've noticed in the past, we get calls on weekends after hours for bylaw, which now those go to OPP. So we're taking the OPP, what their main duties are, and assisting our bylaw. So this gives us more flexibility to assist with the bylaw enforcement 7 days a week. And the last is a part-time infrastructure clerk. Again, similar to the EAHR supervisor. Our building, we have 1 building clerk in the town. In the past, that building clerk would share duties with building and infrastructure. With our growth and development, we had to have that building clerk exclusively building department, right? There's such a demand there, which now left a gap in infrastructure where we have the MAA agreements, Cogeco, fiber, driveways. We're not getting to those because we need that as support. So right now, working with the union, we do have a temporary in there for 3 days a week, and that's why we're just for 2023 looking for a part-time. So those are the ones we recommended. As Director Drusevich mentioned, we had over 15 business cases. We reviewed all of them. I would like to say and present all 15 because I feel they're all in need, but fiscally responsible, it's not realistic. These are the ones, if you notice, there are a lot of frontline customer service and to address issues that we've encountered due to our growth.
Thank you. so now we are moving on to the individual divisions within and departments within the town. Not going to go through all the verbiage here. Let you guys do some light reading later on. But we do give descriptions of each of the different departments that fall underneath Doug. Office of the CAO. So what you'll, and again, as Councillor Guerin requested, we'll provide these slides for everyone. Page 28 of your budget document, you're seeing that police falls under this division, and they account for the biggest expense, being 3.26 million under this portfolio. Overall, the Office of the CAO represents 13.9% of the total budgeted expenses. So we present in two ways through the budget document: by cost center and their net expenses, and then we present by revenues versus expenses on an overall basis. So again, I'm not going to go through the nitty-gritty and details. It's there for your information, for public information, but what we are going to go through is the revenue versus expenses. So in addition to the budget document last year was the significant changes that you will see at the bottom of your budget document. And it's actually points of clarification for any significant change you're seeing. So those are now noted and printed with the budget document. So for this division, what you're seeing is a decrease in conditional expenses. Those were the COVID-19 grant monies that I referred to earlier. We're seeing a large increase in revenue, and this is what we did to fund waived development charges. So we brought in nearly 650,000 to fund the in-year waived DCs. You'll see in the next few slides, I'll explain that further. And other significant changes to note are the interfund transfers. So this is the waived development charges that we actually have to put into the development charge reserve. Also materials and supplies, 2022, we noted a cost savings because we don't anticipate an election to be held in 2023. So those were due to election expenses. Materials, miscellaneous services, those were the COVID expenses that we reallocated across the whole organization that we referred to earlier. And then the salaries and wages, Doug just went through, but the executive assistant, and then there's also a proposed council remuneration review within this. So overall, you're looking at a 2.5%. Waive development charges is the next slide. And we thought it was important to highlight the impact of the waived development charges to this term of council. So what you're seeing is a proposed nearly $1 million hitting the operating budget this year. So administration is investigating ways to avoid such drastic amounts of waivers, but now with Bill 23 in effect, it's presented challenges to us. So we do anticipate reporting back to this term of council. What you are seeing in how we funded it. So it is funding $1 million to the operating budget in 1 year is not going to work, right? You're looking at an 8 or 9% tax increase, and that's not including inflation. So there is no way to realistically fund that and have taxpayers pay the burden, nor should they, because why should we have taxpayers paying for growth? So what we've done is devised a plan where we fund a large portion of the waivers through our landfill reserve, and we repay it as we collect the taxation revenue from those developments. So at the end of the day, that was the reason for it, right? That was council's motive behind introducing those elective waivers, was to spur development. So once we see the revenue collected, we will repay this loan. But you are seeing we are having to use 550,000 from the landfill reserve to offset this burden. Okay. Corporate services. So actually, any questions before I move on to the next division?
Yeah, I got a couple from some slides before. I was waiting to see if they got answered. One was in the debt. What would be considered a healthy level of debt for the town?
Through the chair. So I know everyone wants, to be able to say 20 million is the magic number. Really the best benchmark is that own source revenue, right? So The ministry looks at it, 25% of your own source revenue is your max. We've decided that it's 15% because it gives us a 20% leeway. But the important factor there is own source revenue. So we can rely on that revenue coming in every year. So it doesn't include those potential factors that we could lose like OMPF or OCIF or anything like that.
So the next was the levies. So there's 3 new levies coming in. I kind of understand a levy as something that we put in place for a specific period of time. So like our roads levy, it's only going to be used for roads. And does it say how long that levy is going to be in place for?
Yeah, at this point, we're recommending it for 2023 and onwards, right? So that was the plan through asset management. The consultants recommended it for a 15-year period. So we would recommend it through this term of council.
Councilor Mady? Any other questions from members of council? Councilor Rabique?
Madam Chair, to our CAO suite, just on the 2 new part-time positions in our bylaw department, is there consideration being given to that staggering the shifts for these new hires, as we've kind of discussed in the past?
Mayor Bondi, yes, they're both unionized positions. So we would have to work with the union, but our goal is to have hours similar, say, an arena operator, 7 days a week, weekends are hours. And so we would work with the department on how that would be scheduled in coordination with the one full-time bylaw operator.
Questions from council? Councilor Guerin, anything? No? Okay, we'll keep going. Director Drusevich.
Okay, thank you through the chair. So the next division is corporate services, probably the most important division. Okay, I got to laugh. That's great. And so again, not going to go through all the different departments that are within this, but what you can see is corporate services does make up substantially most of the expenses. We do have a lot of the grants flow through this division. So again, it's more of an accounting flow through, but it accounts to approximately 23%. Garbage does also fall under this division. So it's important to note because that's where you're seeing some of the larger increases, right? Directly from the service provider. Also, so you're seeing a decrease here, and that is because taxation growth and taxation revenue increases are classified here under finance. So when we talk about the overall increases or decreases through this cost center, what you're seeing is a large increase to amounts added to special levies. This is the increase in urban and rural levies that we talked about on an overall basis earlier. The decrease in conditional unconditional grants being the decrease from OCIF that we were allocated this year. The prior year's surplus, again, the funding mechanism that we brought in to fund some of the waived DCs and the garbage increase. Property taxation, the increase in revenue there from assessment growth and the proposed tax rate increase. The user fee and service charges, that is the increase in landfill compensation. So that was a budget reset adjustment truly, and that is an in and an out. Contracted services, mainly the 300,000 that we saw earlier from garbage contract. So the direct increase there. Interfund transfer increases. So as mentioned above, the landfill, we did a budget reset increase of 800 that goes directly into reserve. So that's within that expense line. Also within there is internal transfers that we did to help fund the waived DCs. So that's taking it and putting it in the DC reserve. And also a transfer to repay the garbage reserve deficit from 22. So we had that in-year deficit that had to be covered as well. And we didn't want to shock users with a rate. So that was where we used the surplus to fund it. And then salaries, you're noticing an increase. That is mainly due to the reallocation of retiree benefits. So previously retiree benefits were scattered all throughout the organization. It was fairly hard to maintain from an administrative perspective because they were in one of the 100 cost centers. So we've allocated them to one cost center just for better administrative tracking. So that's it for corporate services. We'll go on to community services and then we'll open it up for questions again. Community services has their relevant departments listed there. What you can see is arenas is the largest expense by division, and they account for approximately 2.6 million. Bless you. Overall, community services accounts for 18% of the town's proposed budget in expenses. So we have it allocated by cost center again. I'm not going to go over this. It's for your purposes only and public viewing purposes. But what we are going to do is take a look at the changes on an overall basis from revenues and expenses. So what you are seeing here is an increase for revenues. And this was, again, one of the alternate revenues that administration came up with in the budget reset. So we were able to use some development charge money to offset some of the long-term debt used to fund the Essex Arena. So that's a new revenue stream that we brought in for 2023. What you're also seeing is interfund transfer expense. And so in 2022, we were doing some transfers to reserve for a fire radio upgrade. That's actually going to be purchased in 23. We no longer have to do that transfer to reserve. Salary, wages, and benefits. You're seeing an increase there as CAO Suite reviewed the introduction of a full-time horticulturist, horticulture specialist, I believe we refer to them as, and the full year impact of the customer service representatives that were in previous budgets. That's it for community services. I'll open the floor right now if there's any questions on those specific sections before we go through development services and infrastructure.
Rusevich, any questions from members of council? Councilor Mady.
Sure. So for the waive DC charges, to repay our loan to the landfill, we're saying we were going to recapture that money from the developments. Is that going to be done like in the form of a levy again, just on those residents, or is it still just going to be part of the taxation for everybody?
No, we're going to use the growth monies that we mentioned earlier as we realize them. So for 2023, we realized like 330,000 in growth. So in future budget years, a portion of that growth would be allocated to the loan.
Council? Okay, development services.
Okay, so again, we have the relevant divisions presented on screen. Development services, you can see development charges. It accounts for the largest expense there, being almost over $4 million estimated for 2023. And we reviewed some of the major developments occurring throughout the wards earlier. So they account for 12.5% of the town's proposed budgeted expenses. We have all of the different cost centers viewed here, but our main focus, as in earlier slides, is going to be the revenue versus expense summary. So you can see the largest being the contribution from developer, the 2.2 million. We touched on this when we reviewed the overall changes, but this is really due to an increase in expected development in the town. So when contractors come in or developers come in, they have to pay development charges at building permit issuance. And because of the sheer volume that we're expecting, we expect that amount to go up to 2.2 million. Also coinciding with development charges collected is license and permit fees. So builders have to pay permit fees on building construction. And so that coincides with the increase above. User fees and service charges. So that is what we were referring to earlier, that convenience fee that we're collecting for cloud permit. That's monies that we're using to offset that expense. So when it comes to expenses, that interfund transfer, you are seeing that increase because we legislatively have to take all of those DCs we collect and put them into a reserve. So we can use it in capital for growth related projects, but it can't be used in operations. Next, we have materials and supplies. And so you're seeing a decrease there, $56,000. And this is, again, part of the budget cleanup. And we also previously had the $40,000 contract that Doug was talking about has been reallocated to a full-time position. Rents and financial services is the increase that we discussed earlier. We're seeing an increase of approximately 121,000 that we're mostly offsetting from the above convenience fee. Salaries and wages, the increase is from the proposed full-time junior planner. We also have a full year impact of the deputy CBO and the full-time building clerk, as well as the 2 proposed bylaw officers that we discussed in the wage walkthrough. So it's appearing as if it's a 26% increase, but again, this is where we need to strip out the development charges because it's truly an in and an out. So next we'll go on to infrastructure services. So you can see all of the divisions within this department listed here. So potentially he's the most important because he makes up the most operating expenses, 32%. And so you can see water and sanitary, I never should have said that. And it's recorded. What am I thinking? Anyways, no, all jokes. So 32%, and the most of that being the water, work, and the sanitary sewer departments. Again, those are user rate funded reserves. And so next is our roads program. You're seeing over $2.1 million in expenses towards that. And then I'm not going to go through the other ones. Many cost centers here. What I do want to highlight for council's purposes and the public, you're seeing lots of cost centers here that have $0 amounts and not truly a $0 cost center. Again, this is net, right? So it's showing revenues less expenses. Any of those are user rate funded. So we have to make sure we use reserve monies to fund a deficit, or if we have a surplus, we put it into that reserve. It's part of the water financial plan that we adopt. Okay. So again, that's why it's important to focus more on the revenue versus expenses, because these do show the true revenues and expenses within water and sanitary sewer as well. So what you're seeing here is an increase in internal transfers, water and wastewater reserves. Like I had just said, if we realize an increase in expenses, we have to fund it through that reserve. And that is what that money represents. Next is user fees and charges. So that is the increase that was approved back in December for water and sanitary sewer rates. That's the increase we expect to realize there. So you're also seeing approximately $784,000 in contractors' expenses increase, mainly due to winter control increases. So we realized some significant increases in the price of our salt, for example, and aqua. So the aqua contract costs also had some substantial increases. Debt servicing, you're seeing an impact here. I've mentioned it a couple times now, but that is in relation to the Ward 1 storm sewer project that's underway right now. Materials and supplies. Here you're seeing almost $400,000. Again, this is for bulk material purchases, whether it be winter control or the road contracts under this division. Salaries and wages, we're seeing an increase here due to some internal reallocations, as well as the water operator was added within the 2023 year as well, towards the end of 22, but a full year for 23. Utilities, we mentioned this previously, so it should be tying in from the comments above, but this would be the savings realized on the LED conversion. So those are all classified here. We did pretty amazing for time. We're at 11:55. So I will open the floor for any questions before we're able to break for lunch.
Okay, thank you, Director Drusevich. I do have a request of information for council is when administration gets time to provide the new council with the front end financing model for the Valenti homes and where we sit with that. I think that might be helpful information. Any questions from council to our administrative team? Okay. Seeing none, I think I'll put it over to CAO Suite.
Mayor Bondi. So that's the kind of the first half, and give Director Drusevich credit, 2 hours dead on for intro and kind of operating. So we do have lunch provided. We'll take a break right now. We'll come back at 1 o'clock. That's still good for timing. Come back here for 1 o'clock. So please feel free to go to the back lunchroom. We do have lunch provided. If you do have to step out of that, please be back for 1 o'clock when we be. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, council and directors. We'll see you back here.